12 tables were the foundation of Roman law. Featured prominently in the Forum, each table stated a right and/or a duty of a Roman citizen. Cicero perhaps summed up their importance best when he said, quote, 12 tables seems to me assuredly to surpass the libraries of all the philosophers, both in weight of authority and in plenitude of unity, end quote. And Cicero was not exaggerating. The 12 tables quite literally formed the basis for not only the Roman legal system, but how Roman society as a whole functioned. So then, what did the 12 tables actually say? Why were they so important? And how does each table rank among the other tables and in history? Let's talk about it. Before we get any further into today's episode, I just want to quickly ask that you subscribe and like if you enjoy my content. It really helps the channel out and it motivates me to make more content. Now back to your regularly scheduled programming. As we discussed in the last episode, link in the right hand corner and in the description if you haven't seen that, the establishment of the 12 tables was part of the wider series of events known as the Conflict of Orders. Rome had appointed two different 10-man commissions known as decemvirs. These commissions put together the 12 tables based on earlier Roman traditions in 449 BCE. Each copper table dealt with a different aspect of Roman society. The tablets were featured prominently in the Roman Forum and provided a way for the plebeian class, which didn't receive the same level of education as the patrician class, to learn and understand what rights and privileges they held. Each of the first 10 tables focused on one specific aspect of Roman society, while the last two were cobbled together with the various scraps that didn't quite fit anywhere else. We should also note here that we don't actually have the text of these tables in their originality. The original tables were likely lost during the Gallic sack, and no reproductions that we know of survive into the modern day. Instead, we rely on people like Cicero and others to give us quotations and other such writings. So keep in mind that we may have some quotes that are not quite correct. The first table deals with the procedure for the courts as well as individual trials. While you can see the actual writings on the screen in front of you, I will attempt to sum this all up in some more modern language. Firstly, if a defendant is accused of a crime, then he is typically required to show up in the courtroom. If he is unable due to age or illness, then the plaintiff must provide some form of transportation for the defendant to come to court. If the defendant attempts to run or otherwise refuses to show up, then the plaintiff is allowed to, quote, lay hands on him. Essentially, this means that the plaintiff is allowed to use force to get the defendant into the courtroom. Further, only a patrician can represent a patrician, while anyone, patrician or plebeian, can represent a plebeian. If or when the parties agree on a settlement, then the magistrate, the judge, shall announce the verdict. If they cannot agree to terms, then the two parties shall meet with the magistrate in the courtroom or the marketplace before noon, whereupon the magistrate shall render a decision. If one party does not show up before noon, then the magistrate must rule in favor of the party present. If both parties do show up, then the time limit for a decision is sundown on the same day. The second table further elaborates on how exactly a trial should be conducted. Firstly, this table sets up the amount of financial stake that each party is responsible for during a trial. Typically, each case requires a deposit of 500 or 50 asses, an early form of Roman currency. Next, this table details what to do in the case of some sort of impairment on behalf of the judge and/or one of the litigants. Mostly, the answer is simply to postpone the trial on that day. Lastly, this table allows each party that needs witnesses to call for such witnesses on every third day. We believe that the mention of this doorway on the table refers to the witness's own home, in a similar manner to how the police may serve you a summons to court in your own home today. So all in all, these two tables are actually extremely fair, and were probably a godsend for the plebeian class. For the plebeians to know that their accused must come to court one way or another, or that the actual proceedings would occur at noon, or anything else from these tables, would have completely changed the way these trials were approached. While we don't quite know just how widespread knowledge of these rights and procedures were among the plebeians prior to the establishment of the 12 tables, we can imagine that it was fairly low. Suddenly having this information at your fingertips was likely revolutionary, and probably changed the way that trials would work in Rome forever. Overall grade? I'd say an A. The next table deals with the execution of judgments from these various trials. This table gives 30 days for the person who lost the trial to pay the debt owed. It gives the creditor the right to lay hands on the debtor after those 30 days if no payment has been received and bring him back to the court. Further, it prescribes that unless an individual, or someone on their behalf, can pay the debt, the person will be taken into bonds by the other party. If the person in bonds wishes to, he can live on his own means. If he doesn't wish to, then the other party must give him a pound of bread daily. The person can be held in bonds for up to 60 days, and during those 60 days they must be brought before a magistrate on 3 consecutive market days. Each day, the amount that the person has been held liable for will be announced within the market, and if on that 3rd market day the person still has not paid, then he will either be subject to capital punishment, likely some sort of whipping or some other such punishment, or be subject to sale abroad. Lastly, on that 3rd market day, each creditor, the winner in the case, shall have the right to take shares of the loser's property in lieu of payment up to the judgment in the case. Wow, that seems pretty harsh, right? Well, these laws were at least able to restrict the debt slavery that had been so prevalent in Rome to official business dealings, and at least gave the debtor a chance to plead his case. Remember that debt slavery was a massive problem in Rome around this time, and one of the main causes of the conflict of the orders in the first place. While this table certainly did not eliminate it, it did likely give the plebeians a fighting chance. Overall grade, probably somewhere between a B and a C. While the punishments were certainly harsh, for the time it wasn't all that uncommon. The 4th table deals with the rights of the heads of families. This table is probably the most shocking to our modern beliefs. Firstly, this table states that any notably or dreadfully deformed child must be quickly euthanized by the head of the family. This included both mental and physical deformities. Further, it states that sons are the only children born into the inheritance, and that if a son is born less than 10 months after the death of his father, he is equally entitled to an inheritance as the other sons. The table goes on to guarantee freedom for any son who is unsuccessfully sold by his father 3 times, and gives the patriarch the right to remove his wife from the household and order her to, quote, mind her own business. Yeah, that one is really rough. It's laws like this that many people miss in their examination of Roman law. Many people in the public, and even some historians, like to paint Rome as this great and equal society. But the truth is that it was a very patriarchal society, where the father of a family was essentially granted supreme power over any other members of the family. We will see further examples of this as we go on, but I think it is important to understand that Roman law was not equal, even after these tables were created. Overall grade, an F, no doubt. Table 5 deals with inheritance and guardianship. Firstly, women shall be under some sort of guardianship even after obtaining their majority, unless the woman is a Vestal Virgin. The property of women could not be transferred by the woman herself, but only by her guardian. The next half deals with a person's will and the laws surrounding such documents. Firstly, any request by the deceased made in regards to his property or other such possessions shall be honored. And if that person died with no direct heir, then his closest living male relative shall receive his estate, except in the cases of freed slaves. Their estate shall be given over to their patron. Furthermore, if no guardians for either women or young sons had been appointed in the will, then the closest male relative shall become such a guardian. Lastly, shares of the inheritance shall be given equally to all heirs, along with all debts incurred by the estate. This table is a mixed bag. Of course, the glaringly obvious and horrible portions on women are quite shocking. In this table, women are treated like property, and they are essentially given no rights of their own. This again simply reinforces the fact that Rome was a patriarchal society. Rome was not some equal opportunity land where women had the same rights as men, and it is important to remember that. The second half of the table is much more understandable. While it does prohibit women from inheriting anything, it does give all a man's sons right to an equal share of the estate. Overall grade for the inheritance, let's say a C. For women, it's certainly an F, maybe even lower if that's possible. The 6th table deals with ownership and possession. This table makes verbal promises or deals binding. It also grants land ownership after a period of 2 years of open and continuous use by a person or entity, as well as creating a legal form of marriage if a man and woman live together for more than 1 year. If a woman wishes to exempt herself from such an arrangement, she must leave the home for at least 3 consecutive nights. You can see what the goal of this table is. This table is meant to formalize situations where Roman law would normally view a person as landowner, or a couple as married. Essentially, this gives a way for those who can't afford land or can't afford a marriage to receive that land or recognition of their marriage after a certain period. Overall grade, probably a B. While it does do a good job at recognizing marriages and the ownership of land, it does put the onus on a woman to avoid the situation, and thus is pretty discriminatory. These next 2 laws are probably the most complicated and the most detailed tables. Let's try not to get bogged down in the details, as those are not all that important in our study of the tables, and let's instead focus on the overall themes and try to combine some of the fairly lengthy notations. First, we have the 7th table, which deals with real property, i.e. land. Firstly, this table deals with the setting of boundaries for various types of property, including farms, cottages, and other such plots. Secondly, this table makes a landowner responsible for building a road over his land for travelers to follow, and gives those travelers the right to choose an alternate route if that road becomes damaged. Think of this as a sort of insurance that a landowner could not punish or attack a traveler for having to walk on some other portion of the land. This table also gives landowners the right to remove trees which have fallen onto their property, and the right to collect fruit which has fallen onto their property as well. Further, this table ensures that no articles of ownership can be given to a buyer unless he first gives the agreed upon payment or some other sort of promise or guarantee. Of course, as you can see on the screen in front of you, there are quite a bit more exemptions, specifics, and so on that we don't really need to get into. Just know that this table was certainly one of the most important, as the rights around land and other such ownership was likely only known to the patricians, and that exclusive knowledge would have made it much easier for a patrician to get one over, so to speak, on a plebeian. Again, much like the table dealing with trials, this table was likely revolutionary, and probably greatly changed the balance of power in the economic sphere. Overall grade, an A. The 8th table is the longest of the 12, and without a doubt the most complicated, so bear with me here. This table deals with torts, an act or statement that causes civil wrong to a person, and delicits, a criminal wrong. So this table essentially describes punishments for common crimes and civil actions. Firstly, anyone singing, chanting, or otherwise saying harmful incantations shall be subject to execution. Remember, Rome was a very superstitious society, and the idea of wishing or attempting to cause some sort of harm by incantations was widely believed and feared. Secondly, injuring another person results in one of two things. It could result in a retaliation, whereby the same injury is inflicted onto the person who committed the act in the first place, or it could result in some sort of payment as compensation. Eye for an eye and all that. Anyone who steals crops knowingly shall be put to death as a sacrifice to Ceres, the Roman goddess of agriculture, and anyone who knowingly destroys a bundle of crops or a building shall be burned to death. Pretty hardcore, right? Although we should remember that in these times, those crops would have been all that a person had to feed his family or make any sort of money with. Crops were the lifeline for farmers, and destroying them was paramount to attacking a person directly. We will skip a lot of these, but feel free to pause the video to read any that you wish. But two more that I feel the need to point out are the penalty for false testimony, being thrown off the Tarpeian rock, and the fact that this table banned nighttime meetings within the city. Some of these punishments seem severe or a little overboard, but we should remember that laws within Rome were not only civilly important, but were religiously important. So if you lied in court, not only were you committing an injustice before your fellow citizens, but that injustice was also committed against the gods themselves. And when you look at it like that, it kind of makes sense that death was required to satisfy the gods. The point here is that the Roman legal system was undoubtedly harsh, but when you consider just what it meant to the people of Rome, it's kind of unsurprising just how harsh it was. Overall grade, for the period, an A. For our modern period, probably an F. The 9th table deals with public law and the conduct of magistrates. Firstly, laws of personal exemption, meaning laws that granted privileges or immunity to singular people, were forbidden, and laws dealing with capital punishment could only be passed by the Comitia Curata, or General Assembly. Next, any judge or magistrate who was found to have been bribed in a case shall be executed. And lastly, the law prescribes the death penalty to anyone who incites rebellion or treason and guarantees that no person shall be executed without first facing trial. This is actually a pretty progressive table. It essentially guaranteed a trial to anyone before execution and actually gave a pathway to punish corrupt magistrates. Overall grade, an A. The 10th table deals with Rome's sacred laws, as well as burial practices. This table prohibited the burial of dead people inside the city limits. This table also limited expenses for a funeral to just 3 professional mourners, a mourner wearing a purple tunic, and 10 flutists. Yeah, a Roman funeral was pretty fun, to be honest. I definitely want professional mourners at my funeral. Women were not allowed to tear their cheeks nor make loud outcries at funerals, and no gathering of bones for a second funeral was allowed, save for deaths in battle or abroad. This essentially limited each dead person to one funeral. If the dead person had gained some sort of crown by his property, by honor, or by valor, then that crown would be put upon him at his funeral. This table also prohibited any excessive displays of wealth, the adding of gold, save for gold teeth, and excessive drinking at funerals. So overall grade, probably an A. Anything with professional mourners is great for me. Now, these last two tables are mostly addendums for previous tables. The 11th table is based around marriage and pairs with the 4th, 5th, and 6th tables. This table first bans intermarriage between patricians and plebeians. This would eventually be changed in 445 BCE, just 4 years after the formal creation of the tables, along with requiring soldiers to put their marriage on hold to finish training, and providing regulations on what days official legal proceedings could occur. The 12th table lists more punishments for common crimes, and lines up with the 8th and the 3rd table. False accusers face double the punishment. A theft committed by a slave with the knowledge of their master results in the forfeit of the slave to whomever was stolen from. And lastly, and perhaps most symbolically, any act or ordainment by the people shall be legally binding, no matter the circumstances. I really believe that the last note in the 12th table was almost certainly done on purpose, to place the ultimate power for decision-making with the people. Overall grades? For the 11th table, probably a B or a C. The whole intermarriage thing did not last long and was obviously discriminatory, but the other 2 points are important and do kind of make sense. For the 12th table, probably a B+. While the punishments might be slightly severe by our modern sense, they are actually pretty common for the time in history, and frankly unsurprising. The last line, though, is very impactful, and will be important throughout Roman history. So, you still with me? That was a lot of information, but we should remember that this was the culmination of hundreds of years of Roman legal tradition. So it's not really that surprising that it would be dense and fairly hard to follow for someone like us who didn't grow up with these laws. So then what was the significance of these tables? Well, these are probably the most influential pieces of writing in the history of the Roman Republic, and possibly all of Roman history. No joke. This was the foundation of Roman law, and heavily influenced later law codes such as Justinian's laws, and even the American legal system, with James Madison himself even highlighting the importance of the 12 tables on the Bill of Rights. Common law, one of the most influential types of law in most English-speaking countries, was also greatly influenced by the 12 tables. Hell, even if we discount the content of the tables entirely, the simple idea of presenting the people with codes of laws that actually enumerated their rights, privileges, and duties is massively important in the history of law. The historical significance, for both the Romans and our modern Western legal system, cannot be overstated. This is really the beginning for many of the legal systems in the West. But how important were these tables to the Romans during their creation? Again, extremely important. We must remember that Rome didn't have public schools. Plebeians were not granted the same education as their patrician counterparts, and this left them at a distinct disadvantage when it came to legal rights, practices, and so forth. The fact now that any Roman who could read could walk to the forum and see their rights enumerated was revolutionary, and it without a doubt went quite a long way in leveling the playing field. Cicero tells us that most Romans learned about the 12 tables from their childhood, and that the rights guaranteed within them were imprinted into Roman minds. This just captures the importance of the tables. The tables were not just laws that each Roman must follow. Instead, they were guarantees. Guarantees that no one would face death without a trial, guarantees that the accused would show up in the court, guarantees that judgment would be fair, and guarantees that power ultimately rested with the people of Rome. This isn't to say that the tables had no flaws. Women were treated as little more than property, and the legal system still favored those with the means to pay fines. But it was a start. It was a start towards equality in Rome, and it was a start towards equal justice for all. So in the end, I don't think I'm exaggerating when I say that the 12 tables might be the most important legal document ever written, not only for the Romans, but for all of Western civilization. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you learned something. I'm sorry if this video seemed a bit like an information dump, but the 12 tables are the culmination of hundreds of years of Roman law, and hopefully I managed to condense them down into understandable bits. If you have any comments or questions on the video, or believe I made a mistake, please comment down below. And please like and subscribe if you enjoyed. It really helps the channel out. Peace.